The MAPPS program committee has been planning this session for a long time. We've been trying to figure out how to do it during these virtual times. We had a fantastic volunteer here who's going to show us how to prepare an SF330, some tips and tricks. Chris Mannix from Woolpert is joining us. She's going to present to us. I've worked with Chris on a number of presentations and proposals. I don't think anyone that I've ever worked with her on we have lost. So I do consider her the expert. Chris, go right ahead.
All righty, thanks everybody, and welcome to the session on 330 Strategies, Navigating the Proposal Process. So many firms aspiring to do contractual work for federal government agencies, understanding the processing and being able to prepare the 330 forms appropriately that will lessen your risk of your proposal being deemed non-responsive. So as a practical user of the 330 forms, I've been invited to share some tips, lessons learned, a little bit of strategy, and some common questions you may have when filling out these documents. So in this section, my objectives are simple and twofold. First, we'll take a back to basics approach and review the forms that comprise the 330 response. And secondly, we'll examine each one separately to draw attention to some significant changes, common approaches to developing a response, breaking out the solicitation, and building the Section H. So we'll touch on some topics as teaming and data calls, how best to go about organizing your section, reviewing the teams and who should be involved, and then what kind of information is helpful for a proposal coordinator to get from a project manager, and lastly, a few lessons learned. So to remove some of the confusion surrounding the required forms, we'll take a brief look at the history of the GSA forms into the progression of the current SF330 forms, including the guiding principles about how and when they're used. So our key objectives here again are to gain some insight into best practices for responding appropriately and in accordance with the federal agency solicitations, quick tips and lessons learned and strategy for preparing a convincing response, and some real-world feedbacks from government reviewers emphasizing key success factors and submission highlights to engage in a thorough discussion of the 330s. So, okay, background, the SF330 revolution. So back to a little history. So the standard form 330, referred to as the architectural engineering qualifications, it was approved in December 2003. It consolidated and replaced the standard form 330, or the standard form 254255 that had been in use since 1975. So all federal agencies are supposed to use the 330 forms when soliciting for AE services. And many state agencies also have adopted this form. So versioning. So the most current version of this form is August 2016. And you can see that right down here in the right lower right-hand corner. The last revision date was March of 2013. So you'll note right up here, highlighted in the top right-hand corner, this version expires on December 31st of this year. So the GSA, the General Services Administration, they will either approve it without change or make some minor changes to it. So why the change from 17 years ago? So to reorganize content into a more streamlined format to provide the information that federal agencies consider most important to the selection process. People with the right experience. To eliminate duplication of information while expanding on essential information. To reflect some current AE disciplines and services, and also to automate the process, given that a lot of our submissions are electronic these days. So what else has changed? The Central Contractor Registration System is maintained by the DoD on behalf of all federal agencies. It was a repository of information about firms that conduct businesses with federal governments. So on July 30th of 2012, the CCR transitioned to the System for Award Management, or SAM, that combined legacy user records in the CCR along with several other websites and databases to aid in the federal procurement process. And then also the FBO. So the FedBizOps, as we knew it, was a site for agencies to post contract solicitations. So in 2019, FBO was replaced by beta.sam. And this is, again, is another initiative on part of the GSA to streamline federal award processes while consolidating numerous separate other systems. So now that we know what's changed, what's on the horizon? So the Data Universal Number System, or DUNS number, that has been the official entity verification number since 1998. So before the end of 2020, this year, organizations working with the government will have a new identifier. So the DUNS will be phased out, and the new entity identifier for records in SAM will be implemented. So this unique entity ID, the UEI, will be 3 characters longer than the current DUNS number. It will be structured to avoid confusion with the old numbers as well as the tax IDs. And the good thing is that firms already registered in SAM will automatically receive a new entity ID. So on to the 330 structure. So this is probably one of my favorite slides because it gives you a really quick visual on how the part 1 is constructed. So part 1 is organized in sections by number, in sections by letter, and then by blocks by number. So part 1 is about the details, the relationships, and strategy. So while the instructions for each block are provided in italics and mostly self-explanatory, I've touched on each required element and provided some interpretive explanations and suggestions on some part that might be a bit confusing or inadvertently overlooked. Sections A, B, C, and D, the org chart. So Section A, block 1 through 3, here is where you put the title, the project location, the original published date, the solicitation notice, that sort of information at the top under here during general information. So in blocks B, you'll want to list the name, the title, and the contact information for someone who the selection board can contact for additional information or schedule an interview. Section B, block 5, is where you put the legal name of the firm or the JV. In section C, right here is where you list the proposed team. So each prime or sub office participating in this project should be listed in a separate row in section C. So a common question, so when do you check the branch office box? So if a firm has more than one office, all offices are considered branch offices, even if one is the headquarters. And if the prime firm has more than one office, the office managing the project is listed first. And this page can be expanded to accommodate additional subcontractors. So block C, section C, blocks 10 and 11. So you want to include the physical address for each firm or office accompanied by each teaming partner's specific responsibilities involvement in this project. So you may want to refer to your solicitation or your organizational chart as a guide when helping identify the roles in the contract for each of your subs. Section D is your organizational chart of your proposed team. So while no format is specified, the chart should show the project responsibilities of individuals and the relationships between individuals on your project team. So the chart should include every individual for whom you have included a resume, section E for. And the chart should cover every discipline listed in your solicitation. And it's meant to show project responsibilities and the responsibilities between key staff, teaming partners to include lines of responsibility within the team. And it should be clear who the prime is in your organizational chart. So to draw that distinction, you may want to consider color coding or annotating by firm. And lastly, down here, as I've noticed, make sure that you check the box noting that your organizational chart is attached.
Chris, we have a question.
Sure.
If the prime or even one of the team members is a joint venture, JV, do you list the JV partners as subcontractors or?
You list the JV partners. So right here on this, I don't know if you can see right here, it has prime JV. So if you were a JV partner, you would list right here in your firm. So it would be Woolpert, and you would check. It would be, so the JV would be listed here, and you could put like the JV, it would be, let's see, OGW LLC would be Optimal Geo is a JV partner and Woolpert's a JV partner. So you would list those JV partners here. You would list the address of them here.
Okay.
Okay, alrighty. Block, okay, here, let me get here, sorry. Section E, your professional qualifications. So if you want to include a Section E resume, you will want to include a Section E resume for each key person who participates in the contract. So unless the client provides you with titles or roles they consider key, it's up to you to determine the individuals who you believe are key in the performance of the project. So the size and the complexity of the project should guide you in determining how many resumes to include. And page limits may also help decide whose resumes are important enough to include. So resumes should demonstrate an understanding of the effort required. So a common question here would be, is the one-page length for a resume an absolute requirement? So unless specified in the solicitation or confirmed by the contracting officer, most submittals will follow a one-page limit. So also another common question would be, are you limited to 5 pages? Are you limited to 5 projects per person? So provide no more than 5 projects per person, again, unless otherwise instructed. So on that note, so while 5 projects are ideal, factors like font and margin restrictions, they may result in needing to show fewer projects. So you may want to consider things like how much space is needed to discuss someone's role in that project, or show how much content you've dropped in other professional qualifications blocks to help decide how many projects to showcase on someone's resume. So you can, oh, and another question too I often get is, can you show previous employer experience on an employee resume, or should it include only projects with their current organization? So the rule there is use any projects that show the employee's ability to perform the work being sought. So you just want to make sure that you uncheck block 19C, performed with current firm as appropriate. So other, so block 12, so key staff names, they should match the names used in the organizational chart. For instance, in nicknames versus formal names, and make sure you include the professional designations. And here's the tip. In block 13, this block refers to someone's role on the project team right up here as I have highlighted. So that might differ from what their role is in the organization. It's pertaining to what their role is on this particular effort. So in blocks 14 and 17, you'll want to provide appropriate experience education for a name and location and professional registrations of your named key staff. So in block 18 up here, other professional qualifications. So use this space to basically prove that an individual has specific qualifications to perform the role indicated for this project. So that might be a narrative or bullet form, and it could include information like training, software proficiencies, unique career experience, any other quantifiable experience with the contracting agency. On to block 19 of your Section E resume. So relevant projects. So you will want to be cognizant of the projects that you're showcasing in Section F, which are your best of class projects, and the involvement that these staff have, if any, in those projects. So for other projects, you'll want to use good judgment when selecting project examples, as older projects, let's say older than 10 years, they may not represent capabilities so well. So project selection, it is a bit of a strategy. So you might want to select projects that do appear in your section F, highlighting the individual's involvement. You might want to select projects that don't appear in section F, allowing an opportunity to feature additional relevant project experience, or kind of use a combination of both. So the title in blocks right here, the title, you'll want to make sure that the title and the location of the project, it should be consistent wherever it appears, and tailor the description to reflect the specifics of that key staff member's role in that project.
Chris, we got a couple of questions.
Yep, sure.
What are your thoughts on modifying the form format? As an example, using only 3 projects on a resume with more room for description text versus 5 projects with shorter descriptions.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. So that's kind of what I meant back earlier when I said, it depends if you're choosing to showcase the projects that you're using in the section F as your best of class on someone's resume, which is ideal because they want to show that connection between people and projects. You might not want to use, you might want to zero in on the descriptive role of what that individual did. So let's say you have a project that has an aerial acquisition component and you're showcasing a pilot. So try and identify what that pilot's or what that person's role is as it relates to that overall project, if that makes sense. So what I guess I'm getting at is you don't, you might want to not go ahead and try and use the same cookie cutter small narrative and drop that on everybody's resume. Because there might be a lot of people that have been involved in that project, but the idea is to tailor. Did someone perform a quality control? Did someone perform the ground control on that? What did the people's role do on that? So you might not be able to, you might be able to say that rather succinctly, but if it's a very niche service, again, it's up to your discretion whether or not you want to use 3 projects versus 5 projects. If your narrative is so thin that you can't get anything from that, you might want to consider. So 3 is probably, in my opinion, probably the fewest that I would ever use on a resume. So is that, did I answer that okay for you then?
I think so. I think so. As a follow-up to that question, what happens if they tell you how many projects to use on a particular resume?
Right. If they go ahead and they say, now rarely they don't. The solicitation typically will tell you how many resumes to show, and they might indicate the resumes of the specific individuals that they want you to showcase in there. You need to be extremely cognizant of that. But in my experiences, they typically do not ever give me a directive or narrative on how many projects to show in someone's resume. They'll just either say, can the resume exceed a page or not exceed a page? But I don't think in recent memory that I've ever had anybody ask me or tell me that I could only show a certain number of resumes on a resume, or a certain number of projects on a resume. So that would kind of be rather unique.
All right, we have one other question going back to branch offices. If a subsidiary office is outside the country, do you list that in the branch section? You definitely could, because if that office, if you are using a resume for an individual that is in that office, and that person is involved in the performance of work under that contract, yes, you definitely can. And again, if that's permissible. So a lot of times you could always ask a clarification question, but no, I don't. It would be just a branch office or a subsidiary of the firm. Yeah, I don't see that would be any problem at all, because they are a participant. They're a participant in this, in the successful performance of work under that particular contract. All right, very good.
Alrighty, so this slide, again, just provides a quick recap of what we discussed. How to decide key resumes and what is absolute, again, versus suggested, and are we limited to your project? So we kind of covered that a little bit. So section F, here is where we demonstrate our specialized experience. So this form is used when selecting example projects which best demonstrate your proposed team's qualifications for the contract. So if possible, you'll want to select projects where multiple team members have worked together. You'll represent 10 projects per team unless otherwise specified by the agency or noted in the solicitation. The prime does not have to have participated in all 10 of these projects. So a common question I get is a one-page length for a project description an absolute requirement or general guidance? So unless otherwise noted in the solicitation or in a QA, most submittals will follow a one-page limitation. So likewise, the solicitation may set a completion date limit on the project examples. So again, like I had suggested on the resumes, any project older than 10 years may not showcase well. So the example project to what's being requested in the solicitation, obviously the better. So this correlation, it will enhance the credibility of your team's qualifications. So starting at the top of the form, oops, sorry, let's go back here. So starting at the top of the form, block 23A, that is the actual owner of the project. That should be listed here. So project 23B and C, you should list someone who can adequately address your particular performance on that project. And then in block 24, that is where you put a brief description. That's the main body of the form and where you want to tailor your description to include the relevant elements listed in the solicitation. So you'll, by focusing on the right content in the description, you help the reviewer understand that the project demonstrates the experience that will benefit them for this proposed effort. So as space permits, you can customize your description by supplementing your narrative with graphics, perhaps highlighting an award or a client testimonial. So down here, as I'm showing in block 25, make sure you list only firms and offices that are on your proposed team, those who you have listed in part 1, section C, and not all firms that may have been involved in this project if they are not part of the current submittal team. So the more firms and individuals on your team who have worked on the projects together, the better. So prior history highlights team relationships. So here, so this is again just a small recap, helping the evaluators by ensuring that the point of contact information is correct, details of the project examples are relevant and pertinent. And just a little note here, so the reviewers are not really interested in a story. So anything that isn't insignificant details. So make sure you zero in on why you've chosen this project to be integrated into your document. And a tip here is that make sure that you identify the roles and the tasks performed by subcontractors on your project examples. And I think this slide here just, again, it provides a very quick recap of what we discussed. So on to section G. So clients want to benefit from the experience of the people who've worked on your section F projects, who you say are your best examples. So on the section G, clients, again, want to see a connection between the people and the projects. So this matrix provides a visual for that. So, what if a staff member hasn't worked on any of the projects shown in your section F? So, or if a teaming partner has no prior experience with the prime. So while prior relationships are important and an important indicator of the team's ability to work together, the prime should look at the overall composition of your team's experience, and not just pay attention to just the check marks, I guess. So it also will depend on how critical that teaming partner's role is in the performance of the work to be done. So in block 26 over here, you will want to put the names of the personnel. You want to list the names in the same order as the resumes, because that way it's easier for the reviewer to refer to the individual's resumes if they desire to do so. So each resume included in your section E must be listed. So regardless if they have worked on any of your 10 example projects or not. So their role in the contract should show the same title as what's shown on block 13 of your resume. So if the project example shown in section E resumes, then putting an X here is an obvious choice. However, you can, a question would be, can you or should you put an X or a check mark if that project is not shown on someone's resume? So while there is no real hard and fast rule to that, guidelines say you can put an X under the project key number for participation in the same or similar role. That said, it's largely up to the submitting firm. So I might do that, but I wouldn't take that to the extreme. So in block 29 down here, example projects, this is where key projects from your section F are listed. So make sure to use the same number and the title as shown in block 21 of your section F projects. So before, this is just a quick recap of our section G matrix, highlighting a couple of notes as it pertains to key staff. On to the section H. This is your additional information. Sorry. Whoops, got ahead of myself here. Alrighty. So use this section to provide additional information specifically requested in the solicitation to address selection criteria that is not covered by information provided in other previous sections. So this information should be in direct response to what is being requested in the solicitation, or its relevance should be critical to making your case for selection. So given the competitive environment for federal proposals, it's imperative that each element of your solicitation be specifically addressed in your section H. So note, you'll want to be mindful of the order of importance the selection criteria are listed in the solicitation, because this does matter. This section represents an opportunity to show how your team is organized and will be managed, particularly if it includes teaming partners who are in different geographical locations. So again, as I noted down here in the quick tip box, you'll want to pay attention to the criteria listed in the solicitation and the order of importance, labeling each of the sections accordingly. You may want to consider numbering your pages, especially if there's a page restriction. And also try and avoid referencing other sections. If it's important, copy and paste it again. There's a good chance that perhaps the information may not have been read or might have been overlooked the first time. So don't make reviewers sift through and find it again. And also, when submitting as a prime, make sure to appropriately identify the roles and tasks being supported by some contractors. Lastly, down here in this block, which is section I, block 33, the authorized representative, don't forget to sign. This is what makes your document a legal document. So this is a quick recap. So here I provided a recap of kind of the do's and don'ts of the, so that the evaluators can get a clear picture of your team's capabilities. So color reviews, collaboration and quality control. So color reviews. Oh, I'm sorry, do you?
Yeah, we have a question.
Okay.
On the section H, one of the things that gets kind of confusing is you want to hit all the criteria, but you also want to address the scope of work. And those two don't always match up.
Right.
So when you're writing the Section H, do you follow the scope of work and address the criteria, or do you follow the criteria and address the scope of work?
That's the preferred. What you want to do is usually your specialized experience and technical competence, they will identify, they will say a professional qualifications, or they might say be specialized experience and technical competence in particular areas. So you want to follow that. And then the scope of work, again, that's usually, that's information where they will tell you that task orders under a particular project will include the following. And sometimes when we get a little farther in this presentation, and I'll mention, that's why it's really important to break out your solicitation, because a lot of times they'll have some introduction and they'll say, oh, this is what the task orders will involve, and they'll go down to the selection criteria and they'll list some pieces, and there may be a couple of elements missing. So I will always go ahead and identify and list my Section H. I will make sure that it follows the appropriate format, and then identify elements of the scope of work when I am addressing the content under those particular categories. So you don't want to just, I hope that makes sense here. But just follow the format of the solicitation, because that will usually guide what is A, B, C, and what those headings are. And then what's discussed in the scope of work, you'll want to just feather that in your discussions under those specialized experience and technical competence areas.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, color, we'll talk real quickly here about the color reviews. So color-coded reviews are an accepted industry practice for a disciplined, logical process to bring an RFP response to completion in a winning form. So the reviews represent increasing levels of maturity. So why a review in the first place? So the goal of a review is to audit the document for compliance, win strategies, risk factors, and cost effectiveness, and basically just overall quality messaging. So a successful review results in a proposal that is persuasive and meets all of the RFP requirements and conveys a unified message. It conveys a suitable and a cost-effective solution in accordance with the statement of work, and addresses end users' desires as defined through market intelligence, perhaps intel that you've gained prior to the release of the RFP. So standard color reviews, as noted here, are blue, pink, red, and gold. So the blue typically occurs prior to an RFP release. Could be also capture. Pink, once the final RFP has been issued, as it sets the direction for the development of your proposal. The red assesses completeness, offers compliant, comprehensive, and a compelling message. And then the gold, again, that's your final quality effort for style editing in the format. And there are other color reviews like a black hat and white glove, but these are the basic ones here. So now that we're on to the part two. So unlike part one, which is organized in section by letter and in blocks by number, the part two is organized only by block and not by section. And just a quick note here. So it is not necessary that the authorized representative in part one and part two be the same individual. So you will want to include a solicitation number here up at the top right here on your part two when it accompanies a part one submittal. And here's where you enter your office location. Again, as previously stated over here, the unique identifier number, that hasn't been employed yet, so that's where your DUNS number will go and be replaced by the unique ID once the DUNS is phased out. And in block 5, please indicate your small business status. That should match what is in SAM. Block 6, you'll want to identify a point of contact that can speak contractually to policy matters for the firm. In block 7 and 8, the name of the firm and former name, if it's applicable, And if there's a former name of a firm, but it's beyond 6 years, that's not important to list. So block 9 and 10, here we go. These are probably the two most essential parts of the part 2. So block 9, employee by discipline. So I'm often asked, is there a limit to the number of discipline codes that a firm can list? And do you have to use the entire list, or can you just use certain codes? So, well, as I'll show on the next slide, instructions, they offer function codes for 62 disciplines. So you'll want to use only those disciplines relevant to your firm. So you'll group the remaining employees under other employees. So after the listed disciplines, type in any additional disciplines, leaving the function code blank. You can identify up to 20 disciplines plus other employees, and make sure that you count each person only once. Make sure the discipline used in part 1 submittal show up here. So for instance, if you're using, you're talking about LiDAR specialists, you'll want to make sure that your employees by discipline, if that's not an option with a function code, you'll want to put LiDAR specialist here, and you'll just merely leave that function code blank. So if you have only one office, the same number will appear under both the firm and the branch column. But if you have a branch office, the total in column 1 of block 9C will be the same for every office, while column 2 will change. And also part 2 can use different function codes depending upon the composition of each office. I know it's a lot to take in for that block 9. And right here is a quick visual of the 62 discipline codes that I had previously mentioned. So block 10. So here is where you reflect the experience of the office whose name and address is listed in block 2, not the entire firm, along with the average revenue associated with the codes for the past 5 years. So again, you select up to 22 experience codes with the assigned descriptions from the 160 provided that I'll show on the next slide. If adding new experience categories, again, leave the profile code blank as we did on the disciplines for personnel, and you'll identify the appropriate range of revenue for each code. You'll want to choose the appropriate index number associated with the average annual revenues for that office, not the entire firm for the past 3 years. Here is a quick visual here of all of those 160 codes that I just talked about. And then here is again in the block 11 where you will want to choose your average annual revenue, and down here in block 12, your authorized representative. Again, similarly to the part 1, the signing attests to the information is correct and factual. So some recommendations. So you might want to consider implementing the following 3 recommendations to impact your kickoff. Just manage the nuts and bolts of the proposal and learn if your proposal connected with your client. So breaking out your solicitation. So before preparing your response, you'll want to take a minute to break out your solicitation completely. So because bits of information may be mentioned throughout the solicitation, formal requirements such as margins, fonts, page limits, etc., that information can be easily overlooked. Often, additional instructions are mentioned in the solicitation that can impact the construct of your response. So, for instance, the primary work under this contract will be, you may find this information threaded throughout the solicitation with all relevant services not necessarily identified under specialized experience and technical competence. So reviewing solicitation requirements will allow you to perform a gap analysis specifically if you're preparing something and you find out that there is a required element and that might cause you to have to reach out to a subconsultant for that. So modifying the forms. So generally, you can tailor the form in any reasonable way. So removing the lines, maybe changing the size of a block to accommodate some text, maybe putting some color in the block. This is acceptable provided that you maintain the general structure, and it's not advisable to change the location or the sequence of sections or blocks. And then debrief. So a debrief can be requested at any time following notification of status, selection or non-selection, and can be conducted either before or after the contract is signed. So you might want to consider requesting a debrief even if you have been selected. So obviously we want to debrief if you're not selected, but even if you have been selected. So I participated in a recent core debrief, and it revealed the following. So win or lose. So the district appreciated knowing that we were interested in the Corps' review panel process and their perceived strengths and weaknesses of the proposal that we submitted. And also we learned metrics. So you'll want to quantify as much information as possible. For instance, the number of square miles acquired or processed, rather than just making some general statements like lots and numerous and several. Okay, so as we kind of near the end, some new procedures for USACE task order awards. So I will go over this very quickly. So for the past year, various core districts have changed the way they award task orders on IDIQ projects. They've been requiring additional information, in some cases, standard form 330 supplements from contract holders. So these changes were a result of the district's council and contracting officers' interpretation that the FAR requires competition at the task order level. So the short version here is that in early March 2020, the Corps published a Director's Policy Memorandum. And basically that required the core districts to issue task order requirement notices, which is called TORN, to all contract holders on any upcoming task orders, and to provide them with an opportunity to submit a 3-page or less response. So firms would typically have on or about 5 days to respond. So basically, good or bad, without reading through all of these newer policies, is intended again to help make procedures across the Corps more uniform. So a takeaway. So this is, I love this slide because my takeaway for you is to remember to give your clients what they ask for and not what you want them to have. So if we have a couple more minutes, I just want to show you very quickly. I'm not sure how well you can be able to see this, but this is a quick solicitation breakout example. So the reason I want to show you this here is that on the next slide here, this breakout example shows how I typically break something out. And this particular one, it kind of deviates from the norm. It allows you 15 projects per team, rather than the 10 that I said was pretty typical. It identifies on this form what constitutes a project. It gives some specific guidelines on the number and the type of personnel resumes they would like to see included in the proposal. It does impose a page and a font restriction, along with some other information to be included in different sections and blocks. It does provide some instruction on how the proposal is to be submitted, and also where and how that's to be reviewed through a website called ProjNet. And it identifies, also there's a couple of small discrepancies in the solicitation that might need to lend a clarification question. So again, I apologize, this might be a little bit difficult to see, but down here, it does tell you specialized experience and technical competence. Section E, when I said 10 years, it does limit right down here, if you can see here in yellow, that they don't want a project beyond the 10-year threshold. up here, section F, cite whether it's performed by the prime firm or joint venture. Here, right here, on the solicitation, it says 15 project examples. This is an example of where the solicitation indicates what they consider professional qualifications and the types of resumes that they want to see. Project manager, how many you can include of each one of these. And again, they're saying here, no more than 3 personnel in each one of the disciplines that they have provided except for the project manager or the program manager. Resumes shall demonstrate a minimum of 5 years experience. So that will often play into the key staff that you select, because they put a requirement here that they not to include anyone who doesn't have at least 5 years experience. A little bit of information here on the past performance and the capacity and the locality. And down here, this is what I talked about here, the submission requirements. It tells you that you can log on. This is how they want the proposal submitted to a DoD safe website. They also give you some requirements here about reaching out and asking for permissions for website access. And then they also give you a key code for Q&As for the ProjNet right here, where they give you a bidder key. And there is a couple of other requirements here about small businesses, and if there is a small business percentage requirement, and lots of other resumes here shall not exceed 2 pages. Again, this is a great example of how it deviates from the norm, because resumes are typically 1 page. But now notice they said 2 pages, but this did not say that you could have more than 5 projects per person, just that it could do 2 pages. So the great thing about this is that it might allow you to expand the qualifications of your key personnel to try and capture some experience here. And then in the section H here, they allow you 15 projects, and then they give you a not to exceed 30 pages. So basically they're giving you the opportunity to do more than a 1-page project. So I just wanted to show you this because I think this is a great example of deviation from the typical. And right here, and noted here, they dictate what is considered a complete project. A project has to be 75% physically completed within the past 7 years. And again, this was a very long solicitation, but you're seeing how I broke it out to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Right up here is very interesting. They dictate what is considered a project. So you have to be very careful about, you might have heard composite description. So if you have worked on an IDIQ project, it's not acceptable to include multiple synopsises of those in an IDIQ project. They constitute here what is considered a project, and a task order is considered a project in this particular case. And then again, your section H has a requirement of not to exceed 20 pages. And there's a font restriction down here, 11-point font, no smaller than. So that is my, that's my presentation. So have you any other questions for me?
I got one while we're waiting on some others.
Sure.
So thinking about the review process, do you have a number of people who should be on each one of those review teams?
So in my case, the review team. So this is interesting. So sometimes you want somebody with a fresh set of eyes, I guess. So I think that I have when I work on these proposals, I have a very small group for our reviewers. So I like to have someone who's reviewing it from technical. I like to have a technical writer editor that can review it for grammar, spelling, and consistency, because they don't necessarily have to know the subject matter, but they're just looking at it for some consistencies there. So also, I also like to have someone from a technical perspective, because, especially when you get into the weeds with responding to the selection criteria and the scopes of work, versioning. You don't want to go ahead and have somebody read and you're referencing the wrong versioning or not referencing versioning if it's been mentioned in there, kind of things like that. But also if there's anybody in the organization that is familiar, that can just read it to make sure that you have the broken out solicitation and they can read your responses, and if it resonates with them. So basically, so I guess at the end of the day, I don't have a hard and fast rule. Not a lot of people, but I try and select a couple of individuals who are a little bit different. Somebody's looking at it from a technical side, somebody's looking at it from a grammar and a spell check side, technical writer, and someone who's looking at it from a compliance side of the house. So I think you just kind of have to kind of pick and choose whoever that might be best in your organization to do that.
Well, we don't have any other questions, Chris.
All right.
Great job. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope it was helpful.
All right, very good.